As little girls and boys, we look up at the glowing angel that gave us life with love and adoration. But for too many, this is not a happy reality. For many, the woman holding us is a true monster. These are their nightmares. Delve deep as we unravel the turbulent bonds between mother and child. You are listening to Monsters and Mothers with your host, Betty Wild.
Hi guys, it's Betty. Thank you for tuning in and listening to today's episode. Today's episode is called Breaking Up with Mom. Not an easy subject, is it? Before we get into the episode, I'd like to thank you for coming, first of all, for listening to something that is no doubt a difficult subject for anybody who is dealing with a toxic mother. Today's episode is Breaking Up with Mom. It's easy to distance yourself from a crazy person on the street. But what if that crazy person is your mother? It's hard to get any kind of a break when you see your mother every day. And this goes for people who are currently living with their mother or live close by. These boundaries almost don't even exist because you two are probably on top of each other in your personal space. There's no more privacy. It's become almost as though you are feeling violated every time that you walk by each other, whether it's like this negative energy or just feeling sickened by each other, tired of it. And every time that you walk by each other, it's like this intense electricity that's so toxic that you're destroying yourself by being in that environment. And even though that word family is so strong and you feel like you have to stick it out because you're family, you have to accept it because you're family. This is what family does. Family sticks together, family first. You have to let that go. Because you have to start controlling the outcome of your own life without the negativity. And that goes for anything negative in your life, whether it's a boyfriend, a sister, a teacher. But you see what I'm saying? It's really important that you remove all type of negativity around you. It's so toxic. And can't tell you how many times I've had to personally let go of friends that I dearly loved, but they just would not stop being toxic. And it was infecting me. And I started to see things the way they did. And it was becoming bleak. So, most importantly, you need to get yourself away from this toxic environment. And a lot of the times, it's not going to be very easy because you are so dependent on them. And for those of you that are still living at home, one of the first things that you need to do is become self-sufficient. My mother used to tell me that I would never be anything but a ditch digger when I grew up. And proving to her and to myself and the world time and time again that I am better than her. I am worthy. I exist outside of her was a goal of mine. I needed to prove that deeply within myself and to let her know that I am a warrior. And honestly, it didn't really need to let her know so much as prove it to myself, because deep down I knew. And it didn't matter how many times she told me differently, there was that seed in me that just knew. And, if you are suffering in the same situation, you also know, you just don't know how to get out. Once you are no longer under the same roof as your mother, you start to realize your strength. You realize how capable you are because this becomes your freedom. One thing I will stress is the need to definitely get out. Go to a temp firm and tell them you can answer a phone and become a receptionist. Google how to make a resume. There's plenty of free templates online. You throw your name on it. You don't have to have much experience to be a temp. In fact, they're just looking for anybody who can answer a phone. You can start from the bottom. And generally, I have to say that being a receptionist is probably a greater place to start because your self-esteem will rise knowing that you can take classes to either do more admin work, secretarial work. A lot of the times when you start off really young, you think, okay, I'll be a cashier or I can work at McDonald's. But there are other jobs that will help you earn a lot more money and not make you feel so trapped that you start to become depressed, because those are good like jobs for like young kids that are starting out and want to make extra bucks like part-time. But to really feel self-sufficient and a confidence in yourself, you want to pick something that you know there is growth in. And it doesn't have to be admin. But when I started out, I took a job like receptionist work because it was easy and they always needed somebody to come in, and you can sign up for a couple of agencies, not just one. So this way that, you'd have some work, and it also builds experience. There are also jobs like waitressing, which you do make money on tips. It could be exhausting, but those tips you can save up and you can take classes and go to school. A lot of people think that you can't go to college, but a lot of these, colleges and programs online now, if you've got the money, they'll take you. Okay. And you don't have to get an education all at once. You can start taking classes and get a couple under your belt. A lot of the times a certificate is just fine. And do something that you love, but start to dream about your future, dream about what it would be like to be free. Because once you have a dream in mind and then you put it into motion, it gives you a goal and it starts to make you feel better about yourself. And all that negativity starts to just kind of roll off of you. And remember, it's not going to all happen at once. It's not going to happen tomorrow. But when you put the first step, it leads to the next. And remember, only surround yourself with people you want to become. Negativity has a way of being contagious. Okay? Remember, misery loves company. Next is know that you are your own person. When you look in the mirror, you will think you only see her or what she has turned you into. You may have her nose, her eyes, her features, and you might even have some of her personality traits. But you are still very much your own person, and not 100% of the people who have raised you will be in you. Okay? Sometimes you just have a few things, but don't let it become all consuming that you're going to turn into your mother because you look like her. It's hard, especially if you guys are really look alike. A lot of people will just, especially because they see that person as their attacker, that when they see themselves in the mirror, they see them and they feel like every time that they look in the mirror, they're being attacked. You got to distance yourself and start to appreciate and love yourself as a different and separate entity from your own mother. If you've already recognized that your mother is toxic, understand that you don't have to follow those same behavioral patterns. It doesn't mean that because she was a bad mom that you'll eventually turn into a bad mom. A lot of people will think that they'd never be a good mother because they don't know what it's like to be a good mom. When in fact, you have the ability to know now how to be a good mom. And you kind of don't realize that that power is in you. I strongly stress that if you have gone through this in your childhood and you find yourself pregnant and you choose that this is what you're going to do, then do yourself a favor and take a parenting class. I cannot stress enough how important it is, because your parent didn't, most likely, because they would have realized that there's so many stages in parenting a child that are so mystifying that it would clear up a lot of the things that you don't know about raising a very small child. And it will remove all the frustrations and angers that cause a parent to abuse their children because they're not educated in that. Okay? So there's a lot of free parenting classes out there. And I really recommend that you do that for yourself, your sanity, and for your baby. It's great to have a role model that you can look up to, whether it's a celebrity. A lot of people will look up to people who have the career that they want. And then you emulate that. Do your research. How did they get into it? How do they become who they are? Because there's so many people who can mentor you without physically being next to you. It still goes with the same saying that surround yourself with people that you want to be like. But please do a search also for survivors who have gone through what you have and come out strong. For me, I actually had a higher power. For me, I had this inner belief in myself, but I also felt as though like I always had God on my side. And that started really young, almost like he was like my imaginary friend who had like a little superpower in my pocket that as long as I had him there, he believed in me and I can do just about anything. Call it weird, but when I was younger, to me, he was like, I talk to him, not like other people pray. I would just talk to him like I'm talking to you. And I would tackle life that way. Next, we're going to talk about owning your emotions. Owning your emotions is extremely important because you need to give yourself the freedom to cry, to get emotional, to mourn what you went through. A lot of people will say that growing up, they had to hide their feelings because it was a sign of weakness, or they didn't want anyone to feel bad for them or pity them, or they were embarrassed of what had happened. So whether you're seeking a therapist or confiding in a friend, know that it's your right to let all of that go. And until you let all that go, you won't be free. Okay? In fact, it has become a scientific proven fact that if you hold in your emotions and the abuse that you endured as a child, it will manifest itself as pain in your body. And that pain is actually called fibromyalgia. And a lot, I can't tell you, almost like about 80% of the women had confirmed this, had significant amounts of child abuse. And there is such a great link that people didn't realize that fibromyalgia is actually caused by trauma, child abuse, or an infection in your body. So please remember to give yourself that time, whether you want to scream it out, kick it out, punch it out. It's really healthy to just sometimes scream. Sometimes when it gets just so overwhelming for me, I will scream. And it's like it releases like this endorphins. And one of my favorite things to say, seriously, when shit just gets too real for me, when I was a kid, I would scream loud. And in my head, there's one thought that would carry me. You're going to have to do better than that to take me down. And that was so powerful for me. I really felt like it created like this Hulk inside of me, and I would grow and I would be so strong, and God help anyone that got in my way. Because once I hit that point, I knew that there was no stopping me. I can do whatever I want. I had the power, I had the belief in myself, and I could see clearly, actually, because I let that scream out. I had hit bottom, and I had said, fuck you, to that situation, and I wasn't going to take it anymore. But I owned those emotions. I released it. So it's really important to do that. You cannot be a walking mat for someone. You have to see the value in yourself. Next, we're going to talk about finding support, okay? And you can seek help from friends, a teacher, a counselor, a coworker. When you face stress and difficulties, your body releases the chemical oxytocin that prepares you to reach out to others so that you don't have to go through hardships alone. Build a support system that you can depend on and create a list of contacts that you can call when you find yourself at that breaking point. Just because your parents aren't the most approachable people doesn't mean that there aren't any other people in the world that you can talk to. I have a great dear friend that I could call anytime, any day, and just belt it all out. Non-judgmental friend too. Somebody who's a good listener. And a lot of the times you don't need them to really give you advice. You just need an ear. Someone to vent to, that you know that they have your back no matter what. It's kind of like screaming, but knowing that someone cares and someone's on the other side listening. Next is set your expectations low for the conversations that you have with your mother. If you are still living at home and have to confront her every day, just smile and let her own anger. I learned this in parenting class, and with dealing with a toxic person, they are essentially behaving like a child. When they yell at you, just smile. This lets them own their own anger, and it doesn't put it on you. Once they realize that they're not upsetting you, they'll back off and say, whoa, why isn't she getting upset? Okay, a smile can go a long way. So if they're telling you awful things, just look at them and smile and tell them, I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm going to go to my room and give this some time to think about. And let's both discuss this when we're in a better mood. If you feel that your mom is dominating the conversation by asking you uncomfortable questions, making jabs at you, putting you down, or giving you unwanted advice, steer the conversation away from the potential argument by standing your ground and changing the topic. For instance, if your mom says to you, you should find somewhere else to live, instead of picking a fight, just say, thanks for letting me know. I'm happy here. Learn to stand your ground firmly, and it doesn't make you any less of a person when you establish that you are also deserving of respect. Expect anger, but don't give in to it. The thing about anger is that it is often used as a weapon to remain in control. When you try to set boundaries and carve space for yourself, your mother will start seeing it as a threat and will use anger to pull you back in where you desperately tried getting away from in the first place. Don't ever expect the anger to go away when you try to establish healthy boundaries, but also don't let it leave you feeling paralyzed. The truth is, you can still do things. It won't create the kind of reactions you hope for from your mother, that's all. But do it anyway. Just because your mother is angry with your choice to grow doesn't mean you should let it hold you back. Have the guts to look ahead anyway. Your upbringing doesn't determine who you can become. One young woman wrote, I hadn't spoken to her in 5 years, and then out of nowhere she called me. In a matter of minutes, despite all the therapy and money invested in getting me healed, I was like a 5-year-old jumping up and down for joy at the age of 42. I developed instant amnesia about how she had treated me and went to see her the following week. It took under 20 minutes for the same old stuff to come out of her mouth, and I was out of there in 40. Now I have to start from scratch. How stupid am I? The cultural pressure on a daughter who cuts her mother out of her life is enormous. Society sides with the mother. The cultural script says that she's the one who gave you life, or in the case of adoption, gave you safe shelter and opened her heart. In the court of public opinion, it's always the daughter who's on trial, unless her mother is well known as an axe murderer or something equally heinous. Because the cultural believes that all mothers love their children and that good mothering is instinctual. The logic is that if there's any disruption in the relationship, it must be the daughter's fault. Perhaps, even more unfortunately, the cultural pressure is likely to make the daughter self-doubt herself and wonder, even as she goes no contact, to save herself and whatever self-esteem is left. The writer continues with, when I finally went no contact, no one supported me, not even my husband, who thought that my duty was to suck it up and continue to deal with her, because she was my mother, or my best friend who also banged the she's your only mom drum. I spoke to all 3 of my siblings openly and frankly about what I was doing and my father. And I didn't just disappear from my mother's life. I told her why in person, and then put it in a letter. I thought I had done it well and without rancor, not realizing I had started World War III. My mother started a smear campaign, talking to anyone who would listen. She told my 2 sisters and my brother that they had to choose sides, or she'd never talk to them again. My sisters folded, but my brother didn't, and she cut him off. My aunts and uncles took her side, and my father accused me of breaking up the entire family. 3 years later, she's still at it and using social media as well to get me. The only benefit? Both my husband and my best friend now understand. She finally took the gloves off in public. A story told to her by a woman who is 38 isn't unusual. It's rare, anecdotally at least, to go no contact with your mother and be able to retain relationships with other family members. It often boils down to self-orphaning, which makes the process that much more painful. Despite the cultural mythology of daughters cutting their mothers off on a whim or in a huff, I've never met anyone who actually went no contact without spending years considering it. Recovering from an unloving mother and reclaiming your life is not easy. And I'm not a psychologist, but from the research and first-person reports, here are a few things that you should keep in mind. You need to realize that no contact isn't a solution. 2, you actually might feel worse for some time. 3, you have to work on healing. 4, you need to expect and anticipate a fallout. 5, you will probably feel isolated and misunderstood. 6, you may struggle with guilt and shame. 7, your losses may be complex. 8, you need to mourn those losses. 9, you may double back and reinstate contact. 10, you may waver in a crisis. Give yourself some time to absorb that. Press rewind, write it down, share it with a friend. This might help other people to understand you. We're now going to read an article from Gabrielle Moss that I really thought was important. What no one tells you about breaking up with your mother. The thing about the last time you talked to your mother is that you don't know when it's happening. Or at least I didn't. Nothing about the last phone call I had with my mother in December of 2014 stands out as a point of no return. Sure, we fought that day, but since explosive, hurtful, and utterly needless fights formed the bedrock of our relationship, nothing about that was remarkable. I can't even remember what we fought about. I just hung up the phone and thought, as I had countless times before, I'm never doing that again. Except this time, I actually didn't. Before that moment, I had plenty of false starts to my life without Mom. The cycle went like this. My mother and I, who lived in different states and rarely spoke in the best of times, would have an interaction that would start civilly. As we got more comfortable in each other's presence, we'd lower our guards. And eventually, something would go wrong. It wouldn't take much. My mother would misinterpret a comment I made about a neighbor, or I'd take offense in an innocuous remark about a high school classmate, and suddenly we'd be at each other's throats. I hated my mother, but I also existed almost entirely in reaction to her. Voicemails and emails still arrived with regularity from 2010 to 2012, as I moved through my first era without my mom. Sometimes they were cruel, sometimes flattering, sometimes desperate. Over these 2 years, I couldn't help but notice that every problem I'd ever had, fear of trying to write, inability to meet men I really connected with, a substance abuse issue that I'd repeatedly tried and failed to shake, seemed to melt away as I ignored my mother. I felt guilty, like I might be a bad person, an opinion my mother also held. But you couldn't argue with results. My life was so much better without her in it. My mother did not see things the same way. She kept reaching out for me, and eventually, in 2012, I gave in. I was a new, better person, and I felt like I could finally take her on. I was wrong. Of course, our relationship reverted to its old dynamics all too quickly. As we remained in sporadic touch for the next 2 years, I felt loved and hated, unhappily but morally righteous. I was doing the right thing, wasn't I? Wasn't I supposed to be there for my mother, no matter what? Wasn't that the nature of being a daughter? Beyond that, I questioned whether severing contact had actually detached me from her. Part of me feared that my mother's deepest desire for us to merge into one, had come true. I hated my mother, but I also existed entirely in reaction to her. She hadn't chased her dreams, so I had. She was hyper-focused on me, so I cared about, well, anyone outside of our relationship. Mother was the only identity she actively embraced. I knew beyond a particle of doubt that I would never be a mom. I had crafted my life to be a negative image of hers. I wasn't sure that there would be a me without her. But in 2014, something changed. It happened when our family dog, who had been the subject of all my affection and emotional interest during my rough teen years, became sick. My mother collapsed emotionally. She couldn't bear to put the dog to sleep, she said, and begged me to do it. In December of 2014, I said I would. And then, like that, I couldn't. I couldn't get back on track. It's a lot easier to have a concrete reason than to say, this person shares my blood, but I do not love them, and I have not loved them for a very long time. I stood outside the station for what felt like a very long time. The dog had been in unbearable physical pain for years. The last time I had seen her, months earlier, she'd been 17. She was unable to stand or control herself when she went to the bathroom. Every time I had seen the dog over the previous year, she was sicker, sadder than the time before, and every time my mother told me that she couldn't euthanize her because she couldn't stand to be alone, because death was too sad, because it wasn't her place. I can't explain exactly why that moment outside the train station transformed me. My mother had certainly had many sudden turnabouts where she demanded that I come home and do a terrible thing she didn't want to do herself. But it did. I prayed for my dog, and when I got home, finally looked at my phone and saw that my mother had been leaving me voicemails for hours. I asked my now husband to listen and to delete them for me. I couldn't fix my relationship with my mother. All I could do, it seemed, was to let our relationship suffer and struggle like that poor dog, or I could walk away. The truth is that part of me desperately misses the pain, the fighting. With it, I knew who I was, the long-suffering daughter, the innocent victim, the child who might figure out how to make this work. Without it, I have no idea who I am. Without my mother, there is no one to hold me back, and there's also no one to blame. Lately, I've started to cringe every time I bring up this to my therapist. Her, still? I thought I was done with it. Of course, I know I'll never be done with this. When it comes to the people who raise us, out of sight, it rarely out of mind. If anything, I think of my mother more often now, and in different ways than I did when we were in touch. I wonder if she's happy, which is totally new for me. I hope she is. I thought I saw her on the street once a year ago. My heart started beating in my ears, and my face got hot. I wondered if this was fate bringing us together, if this was a true sign from the universe that had changed, that being out of touch for so long had helped her look inside herself. And now we actually could have one of those distant parent-child relationships where you discuss only the Yankees and This Is Us. But as I walked towards her, I realized that I was looking at someone else. It's a very powerful story. One that caused me to really reflect on what I had done. And it has been about 8 years since I've spoken to my mother. And before that, it was 10 years. So I broke it off and then found myself falling right back in. And only briefly, because it just started up, the evilness. And I knew I had made the right decision. But sometimes, I had my son. I had so much going on for me, and I really wanted to share it with her. And I felt like, oh my God, I had a baby. It started a business. All these wonderful things that started for me. I feel like a bad child if I don't tell her. And so I sent her an email with photos of my son and where I had come in life and all these amazing things. And her response was so negative, and it put me right back where I was as a child. And I realized that she has no more hold on me, that I actually laughed it off, because my son is like utterly amazing. And he truly gives me that strength I am such an awesome mom. And he tells me all the time, and we are nothing like that. And my daughter, we have this rich relationship, and I am thankful for it. It's not perfect, and that's what you should expect, but it's loving and forgiving and not toxic. And if anybody gets into that toxic mood, or if someone says something, because again, it's not perfect, remember, laughter, apology, and love and acceptance goes a long way. Know the power that you don't have, okay? But you do have the power to be successful. You have the power to try. Do not be deterred by negative people. When people say you can't do anything, it's because they can't, and they're projecting onto you, trying to throw their mediocrity and their low life onto you. You have to be bold. You have to be strong. You don't have to be rude, but you can be focused on your goals and your aspirations. There's nothing wrong with being a successful woman. Thank you for listening to this show. I hope this has helped you. If you know somebody who this would help, please share with them. Please share with your friends. This is an important episode for me, and it would help me immensely to get this message out. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Monsters and Mothers. Subscribe to hear more chilling accounts of mothers who commit unspeakable horrors.